Welcome to the PPUK podcast. Tonight with me, I've got Paddy.
Hello there.
And also tonight, we have our first returning guest, our special guest, Scottie Baldwin. Welcome back to the show.
First returning guest? I didn't know that. That's news to me. I love that. I love breaking new ground.
We had such good response, and also, we enjoyed having you on the show last time. It was such a good time. So you're always welcome back.
Ready to have a ball again. I hope you got some good. I didn't look as a follow-up, but did you have responses to the? Do you look into responses? How much do you pay attention to what your audience says after a podcast? That's the question I have for you.
Me and Paddy, not so much. The podcast is run by Lee, who's another guy that does the kind of parties and the social media stuff, and he passes on stuff to us sometimes. And what he said was this was the most listened to show that we've done.
I'd seen the SoundCloud numbers in isolation, and it had really, really big numbers. It was definitely the one that was listened to the most. So that's kind of
good. We love pushing new ground, and we love giving the fans what they want.
Exactly.
That's why I've never, that's why in seriousness, I've never shied away when people say, hey, anytime I'd done an interview, people say, hey, is there anything that of which you want to steer clear or anything you don't feel comfortable talking about? I said, no, because it was, you can't curate someone else's experience the same way I can't curate a fan's experience of Prince or any other artist. No one can color or curate my experience either. So I just talk about it openly and candidly. And I think there are lessons to be learned. Some Prince of which he would approve, and some that he probably wouldn't. But you can't change someone else's or curate someone else's experience. That's why I'm always very open especially with fans, because I respect.
Thank you so much for that.
That is such a good way of looking at it. And the other thing is, I guess, as a fan podcast, we have no agenda or axe to grind. It's all coming from a very positive place to begin with.
Right.
But yeah, there are always things that perhaps are slightly more sensitive, I suppose. But we'll see what we come up with today. There's no intention.
Yeah, I should have said that at the end of the podcast.
Also, I think like we said last time, was that we're very mindful that we kind of, as fans, kind of, when someone like Prince passes, we're losing an icon, somebody that exists within our world as. But you guys, especially people that worked with him, are losing an actual fully ideal, a full idea of a human being. So I understand. So we kind of like to tread carefully whenever we talk.
And some guests I've noticed do get emotional about when they knew Prince. They get emotional about that. I am less so. Being in a technical support role, I wasn't on stage with him, even though he multiple times called me a band member and called me, he used to say, please respect he used to tell the band, please respect our two extra band members, Scottie and Silence. He used to look at Silence as a band member as well. And that goes to his between the notes, the space between the notes kind of theory, like Silence was a band member as well. So even though I was considered one, I was never on stage with him. So I always kept there was a physical and an emotional distance that some people don't like that I had with him. But I found that was, I had been mentored into knowing that was the best way to be. Kind of keep a business distance to it. Most people want to be close to those artists, right? And I always knew that's a trap. There's a trap there. Because then when it's your time to leave, whether you leave or whether you're asked to leave, there's only two ways to go. I wouldn't have to suffer that same kind of fate where there was too much emotional investment. I learned early to not be emotionally invested like that. So I can keep a distance and keep perspective.
And I think with someone like Prince, that might serve you very well, because it's there's people that are definitely there long periods of time, but then there's also kind of revolving doors and back and forth. And I can imagine if you get too close to an artist in a technical role, that you start to not just miss the job, but there becomes I'm not needed for anything technical. So it's you become well, why aren't they calling from a friendship point of view? And kind of that can be and that can foster I think some people it can foster negative emotions when there needn't have been any.
Prince could, he could do both things very well. He could be all business and pretty much be, why are you here unless you're working? And that's the same guy who then said to me once, when Rad, do you remember Roseanne Diamano, right? When Rad left, when she left the band, and her husband traveled with her a lot. And I say they left because they just left. One day they were just not there in the band. And Prince started to play her keyboard setup over there. And I was like, oh, I guess she's gone. And I heard it was over something kind of trivial, to Prince, but it was meaningful to Rad and her husband. Something about travel or accommodation or something like that. So she left. And then several months later, Prince said to me out at front of house, he said, what I tried to create with Paisley Park was a place that artists could just come back and hang out and all be artistic together. And he goes, and then he said, see, you notice Rad hasn't come around. And I kind of didn't say anything. I was like, and I was thinking, why would she? I mean, I think she was kind of asked to leave or left or whatever. And he's like, see, people, once they're done here, they don't come around. And I thought, well, I didn't question him on that one specifically, but I thought, yeah, but man, you don't create this environment that people feel like they can just drop by and walk in Paisley Park and say, is Prince around? Can we hang out or can we cut a song? He wanted it to seem that way, but he didn't foster the kind of relationship with people. It was very frosty when you left. When you left, it wasn't because it was either because you were bad at what you did, and in which case he said you were letting yourself go, or as I now famously said, I've never fired anyone in my career. They've all fired themselves. Right. When he said that, I just giggled and I was like, okay, man, that's a perspective. But then, so either you recuse yourself from them and you wouldn't be around, or you left and then you weren't really welcomed back. So for him to say like, well, you see, Rad doesn't come around. And I thought, well, yeah, but that's sort of like that look at me, don't look at me kind of theory. Hey, look at me. Don't look at me. And you're like, what? You don't know which one to do. And throughout our whole relationship, I never felt so at ease that I was totally chill around him. I was always in kind of firefighter mode with the pants already half on, tied around the waist, ready to go fight a fire. Right. And so I just never lost that sort of, I was never out of touch with the real reason that I was there was to serve audio for his
because I would imagine, like, again, some like knowing the way that Prince worked is like the spark in his brain could create a fire. You're relaxing. The minute you're relaxed, the inspiration comes, and it's like, we're doing a gig tonight, and then it stops and becomes all work mode, like on the flick of a dime. So I think I would be very much in that. I'd be like appreciating my environment, but I don't think I could ever be comfortable, even with just the skills I have, like in that environment either.
I wasn't comfortable even when I went back. The first time I went back to Paisley Park, it was for something, and I was with the Revolution, and I wasn't even comfortable in the building then. And it was for a different reason. It's because I didn't feel frosty. I didn't feel like I could hear that door. The door that he came through to the soundstage had a really unique sound. They probably WD-40'd the sound right out of it, but it had a really interesting squeak, and then it wouldn't fully shut. It would sort of close, right? And so it had a sound that I can hear in my mind, and knowing that even if I heard that sound again, I wouldn't get that frostiness. Like, okay, he's here. We're ready to work. Let's work. Let's be ready. Let's be in work mode. Because you're right about that, and you have good sense of that. He would just flip into work mode because you always had access. The person that got that best was Dave Hampton. Dave Hampton understood from the right away that even when Prince was out of town, he had the engineers on staff there, and he had stuff ready to do. So they would be sitting in the Studio A lounge reading magazines or doing, there was the ubiquity of streaming and stuff like that was less so in 2003. But Dave always had staff there ready, even when he was. And somebody at one point asked Dave, "Hey, we know he's in LA." And he said, but we don't know he's in LA. And what would you do if he showed up and rents a private jet and doesn't tell anyone he's back, and he lands and he wants to come here from Signature Airlines at MSP and drive straight here and start recording? Would you be ready? And that's why Dave was such a good match for Prince, because he always kept them in firefighter
I mean,
mode.
That sounds like the best plan, because the minute you said like when he's not in town, it's just like he's quite famous for just showing up places out of doors. I didn't know the door had a creak. That sounds like such a Pavlov's dog type thing. If I heard that creak, my hands would go straight to the desk and look like I'm doing something.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why in my career, I learned from that, especially working with an artist for the first time. I never leave my desk, because the mixing console, it's a position of authority, right? It's like a teacher's desk. That's the only place I can work. So I make sure I'm always there when an artist gets to the venue. So if they want me and they want to talk to me, they know where I am. I'm not wandering off. I'm not sitting in catering. I'm not somewhere where they don't know. If I hear they're even in the vicinity, I go out and I'm at my desk. And it's not to have a psychological advantage at all. It's just to be in a position where if they want to be artistic, I'm ready for them to be artistic. Even it goes even to now where when I'm in Asia and I'm mixing JJ Lin, for example, and when I hear that JJ is 15 minutes out, I start rolling. I start recording MP3 on my console. I'm already recording, so that when he comes in and he wants to walk up to the piano and start playing, if he writes his next big hit and he turns and goes, "Oh, did we catch that? Scottie, did you catch that?" I go, "Yes, sir." I'm always rolling when you're in a building. So that goes back straight to my Prince days. That's something I learned directly from working with Prince.
I love that. I love that parity with the studio engineer side of things, and some of the things that I think Susan Rogers said about you. Whenever he picks anything up and starts playing, you've got to make sure you're recording just in case.
Yeah.
So I love the way that concentrically cascades out to the live environment, to everywhere, to the people who are running his studio. Just as if you know he might be getting on a plane, just be ready. It's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, that's right. And with Prince, it's the ultimate example. He was the ultimate example of having to be in that mode all the time, and all the way from Peggy and Susan up to the people, Chris at the end, the people that recorded him at the end, and Joshua, and like being always ready, being in a mode of always being ready. Because once you do that, or once one does that, it becomes easy for one to do everything else, because you've already been to that mountaintop of readiness.
Yeah, and it's like, it's really refreshing, and like I'm happy to hear that there's still artists that you have to be ready for, and that it hasn't got to a point where it's like that kind of spontaneity is lost, and that there's still artists in the world where you still have to have that 15-minute pre-roll just in case the idea comes in a sound check. It must be great to be in that, even if it's not the same person. It must be great to be in that creative environment again.
All of it is how we respond to our environment, and I'm one of large preparation, so I'm always ready for just about anything that happens. I have an A plan and a B plan at all times, and with Prince, often I had a C plan or a P plan. I called it, right. It was the third thing that was always ready. So just knowing that I was going to have to do, even to the point where the last show we did, or the last show he did with the NPG, was in that St. Bart's New Year's Eve show in St. Bart's 2015 to the 2016 New Year's Eve. And I remember talking to the guys down there in St. Bart's on the island, and they were super chill and laid back, the sound company. And I said, "Hey, you just make sure everything's ready, and make sure the lighting desk is next to me, because I might have to do lights. So just have it so that you could turn the lighting board, and then I'll do lights if I need to." And the guy was like, "Okay, cool. Like right next door." And I was like, "Yeah, right next door." And then practice turning that lighting board to me, so that if I have to do lights, and because I know all the arrangements, I'll do lights myself. And the guy was like, "Okay." And I didn't end up doing lights. I think I did a few punches, and blackouts, but just to be ready with that third plan of how are we going to do this. Or I know, speaking of that gig, I know he wouldn't have wanted that gig to be multi-tracked. I just kind of knew he was doing it because it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
It was Roman Abramovich. and who's a billionaire, and Prince was out at his yacht, and then they flew him from the yacht to the thing, and I flew in a helicopter over from there to there, and it was everything was very, just no right side of the menu, right? And Prince was probably just getting in there trying to make this money, make a couple mil, whatever it was. And I knew he probably wouldn't want it documented in any way, but I thought, you know what? I'm doing this show. I'm going to multi-track it. If I can, I will, because what's going to happen is after the show, he's going to go, did you record that? Right. So I knew I had to at least have it ready to be multi-tracked, because that's the sort of thing I would be asked later. And I go, oh no, I didn't know that you wanted me. And that's what happened once during One Night Alone Live is the band was jamming on something. And at the end, he's on the one, bang. And then he goes, oh, good Lord, Scottie, please tell me you got that.
Oh.
And I shook my head out, no. And then he goes, oh, you're fired. He went, oh, you're fired. And so I didn't take that standing up. I mean, or lying down, I should say. I ran right up to the stage, jumped up on the stage, ran over to him at his position in the roads that he was at. And I said, hey, man, if you want to record, you have to just say my name. And then when I look at you, just nod your head upward, and then I'll start recording. Because he was super sensitive about people recording him when he didn't want to be recorded. So I never did. I didn't let him get away with that. I ran up there and just said, right, if you want me to record, say my name and then nod your head upward, and I'll fade it up right on the one and start recording. So then every subsequent to that, it worked, because subsequent to that, when they'd be jamming, he'd go, Scottie. And then I would look at him and he'd nod upward and keep playing. And then I would wait till 2, 3, 4 and fade up the recording right on the one. And then we'd record 20 minutes and I'd fade out. And you see what happened in 2000. Was it 2002? Or what tour did we do that he got
2002, One Night Alone, yeah.
Okay, so it was after that, clearly, that he started nodding upward. I'd record, and then he got a record out of it and satisfied one record on his contractual obligation to the fan club, the MPG Music Club, by just recording those sound checks that he released. So it did work. And I knew my plan was a good one. I just didn't want him to think, like, even make a joke like, oh, you're fired, you missed that. I didn't miss it. I everything I did was on purpose. And then it just took time to get that sort of relationship down. And I don't know that, and Susan would tell you the same thing, that you start to understand him. But I wanted it very clear that I didn't make a mistake.
Yeah.
You didn't tell me record. And here's how we're going to do that from now on. So it worked. It seems a little bit self-serving in this case, but I was just covering my ass, and I wanted him to know that I'm taking care of your wish. And then if it's your new wish to record, we'll do this. But we have to have.
I think it's okay to be self-serving in the way of keeping your job and then being of service to the music. I mean, like you said, out of that conversation, we get C Note, which is a fantastic. I mean, I remember when it was like kind of dripped out track by track over emails, and we all the fan club. Everybody got a different track emailed to them in the fan club, and it was kind of like put together later that it was, we kind of like were pieced together. I think I got Tokyo emailed to me. Somebody else got Nagoya emailed to them. So later it became C Note, but it was just a series for us in the initial phases, was just a collection of those recordings. And actually, on the note of that, multi-track versus because those were just to that stereo mixes, right? Yeah, because I mean, obviously now with digital discs, you can make that decision right there, and then this is going to be a multi-track. This is just going to be a 2-track DAT. What was the pre-planning? I don't know how many shows you did that were actually multi-tracked around that period. And
that's a great question. The only one that I know where you're going with this. So the first show that was multi-track with Prince was the Auburn Hills, Michigan 2004 show.
Was that for the HBO special that was going to happen?
I think so, because it was a air quotes gift from AEG Concerts West. They paid for a film as a present to Prince. They paid for a crew to come in and shoot the whole thing. I think in the back of their minds they thought, well, we'll make money on the back end of this as well, right? So nothing's ever free, right? But but they brought in jibs and they had cranes and, they had all sorts of stuff. And I remember particularly, he had one of the worst shows, maybe the worst show I've ever seen Prince have. Forgot lyrics, came in late on a solo. I remember I was like, what is going on? I was out front looking at my system guy. What is happening? He's like, what's going on? I said, I don't know. It was a strange show, and I don't know whether he did that on purpose or what was going on, but I do remember that not being a great show. It was Auburn Hills, Michigan, 2004, and we brought in a truck for that. So we brought in a truck, and we had to bring in an extra splitter and split, not an extra splitter. We had to split off, 100 channels and bring them all the way out to a truck on the dock and multi-track that. So that was a show. And then the stuff, the last MPG show, as well as the piano and microphone stuff that we did starting at Paisley Park all the way through the last show that I did for him in Auckland. And those all went to the estate immediately upon their request for them. So all that stuff went on the original drives, went to the estate. They've done, I don't know what they've done with them, probably nothing. They're probably sitting at Iron Mountain or whatever, but a very few. Everything else was just recorded straight out of my desk, left and right, which to me was cool because I can survive. I can actually thrive on a left-right mix. Right? You can tell by the box set. If you listen to One Night Alone Live or the after shows, I can do it not only in a controlled setting of One Night Alone Live with my own console, but these after shows, they all sound good too. So it shows that Prince's theory about you can make it sound like a studio recording live. And he was right. And I did it. And that's before we had multi-tracking available to us. So that sort of the era of multi-track recording took away some of my advantage of being able to give artists great mixes right away without having to have a separate console doing the mix for TV.
And because one of the musicology ones were broadcast in the cinema, like live, so that was just straight off left right mix.
Left, right, and boy, did they put they were pooping purple turtles, man. The crew was. They said, "Well, wait a minute, we're broadcasting this all over the nation in General Cinemas or whatever the cinema that bought it," and they said we got to have a remote truck mixing it fully. And Prince argued with himself. He said, "No, those guys don't know like my guy. They aren't going to mix it like Scotty. They won't have the right echo times." They aren't going to, you going to tell me they're going to come and audition? And I mean, I heard him arguing on my behalf. They were saying, no, you'll take it straight out of the board. If you want to compress it, if you want to EQ it a little, but it's coming, you're going to get a 2 mix. And he did. And so in the theater, it's funny because I had never seen that. I knew it went out.
Yeah.
I think we were playing LA, right? I'm pretty sure we were at Staples Center. So it was one of the first shows. It was like the first or second show. And it broadcasts all over the nation. And I was so busy. We were so busy thinking about the tour and getting the things on the tour right that just came and went. That was like a normal show for me. And years later, somebody sent it to me. They're like, "Hey, I don't know if you have this, but here's a link." And I was like, "Uh-oh, am I going to get rickrolled or what?" Then I pressed the link and it was the show. Somebody had it on some site. And he said, "I think he thanks you, but with the wrong name at the end." And so I giggled. I didn't watch much of the show, but I went to the end. And he said, instead of Pakulski, which was my old last name, he said, "Thanks to Mr. Paluski." Paluski. I was like, okay, whatever. What's in a name, right? But Sheila's the one that sort of gave me the moniker of Scottie P. And so when I got married and took my wife's last name, it changed to Scottie B. As I've said, I can always tell who's known me a long time because when they see me, they say, "Scottie P." And I said, "Oh, you knew me before 2008."
I mean, that's a phenomenal. I mean, I know I have a phenomenal ego about hearing Prince defend my mixes to to a cinema chain or something like, or any kind of broadcast, because there's, I mean, when you're going out live, I mean, he did a couple of radio broadcasts. There were a couple of radio broadcasts that came out of like the 2011 shows that were. They broadcast them, and the gain on it was so loud that it was actually peaking. Like, and it was like a live radio broadcast. I can't remember which one of the cities was. I think it was one of the LA shows. 2011.
I don't think so. 2011.
I don't believe.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been. No. Probably wouldn't have been me. So, and it's gonna, because of that's part of the trick. I will say, not trick. That's part of the magic of being able to be an engineer that can get a really good sound in a room for the audience, because I'm always thinking about the audience first. And so and Prince fans, right? So I put Prince fans number one on my, top of the pyramid. And then I think their experience is the first thing I want to do well. And then after that, I think, well, is when I listen back to the recordings, which with Prince, remember, I wasn't able to listen back to the recordings because I gave him 2 DATs every night right away. So I couldn't go back and go, oh, I've got Rhonda a little bit up too loud, or I've got Renato too strong there. I did not have the advantage of listening back to the mixes. I had to go on what Prince, I was like, how are the mixes? You okay? He's like, yeah, cool. Well, we're cool. It just, I didn't know because I had no way of reviewing them. So for the box set to come out and for him to invite me to Paisley Park, and we listened in Studio A to some of the recordings, I went, wow, this really sounds, I was really pleased because that's what I was aiming for. And it's a real feat to be able to mix in a room that's enclosed and you're like basically yelling into a, coffee can and make it sound good in that room, but also make it sound like a studio recording left and right, and make it EQ'd right, EQ the instruments right, so that I'm not pushing too much of the PA in one way, and so that I take those things out of my channels so that they don't sound good in the recording. To make it sound good and balanced is a hard thing to achieve, and I'm very proud that I'm the most difficult artist to do that. For whom to do that, I did it. So that I've really summited and planted my flag in that, and people. Please trust that I'm not breaking my arm off to pat myself on the back. I'm saying that I recognize it now when I didn't back then, that was the kind of mountain I had to climb. It was just so busy climbing that I didn't reach down to look and see how much oxygen I had left. I was just trying to get to the top all the time.
If I'd lasted an entire show or even just an entire run of shows, I'd be patting my back, let alone the recording aspects of it, because this was a demanding guy, as we all know. This kind of goes into, because one of the reasons I was asking about the multi-track versus the 2-track around that time is I don't know if you ever heard it, he released a CD single and a 12-inch single of Days of Wild Live Montreal after show. And there was some overdubs of it. I can show you the cover if that might.
What do we know? What year? If we knew what year it was from, so Montreal, I probably did it because I imagine it was then on Musicology.
This was
right?
The 2002 Montreal after show. So he put it on the Music Club as on Sounds and gave it away free at the celebration.
Okay, I think I remember that. That was, to me, I think that was a 2-track. I don't think it was multi-tracked, because I remember him specifically. As a matter of fact, I probably still have a CD of the Red Book, burned CD that he had me. He said, record Days of Wild, and he said, I'll tell you when we're going to do it. So, and it was on One Night Alone Live. So obviously that was it. But he said, if we stop, put in a fresh CD. So I know that because I had a stack of CDs, probably 6 or so, that I put Days of Wild 1 of 6, Days of Wild 2 of 6, right? And so I had those all ready to go. And so I had 1 of 6 in there and was already recording. And then he stopped or something. And then he looked out there and I quick swapped it out. And then I went, okay, go ahead, and then they jammed it again. And I remember it being kind of long. And then when he came out, I gave him the one that he had just done. So he walked out to front of house after sound check and I handed him that disc that he had just done. So I'm sure that ended up being, I've never seen that. Is that vinyl? I need that then. I need to buy them. I'm trying to collect all the vinyl. So
this,
that
I mean, there's kind of, it sounds like it's one of your mixes, like 2-track mixes, but with him doing some group vocal overdubs just for hits. But I mean, he also gave away a CD that just has the 2-track mix that's about 13 minutes long. So yeah, so you got a concert mix 10:45, and then an excerpt from the live One Night Alone 1 + 1 + 1 is 3, and a single edit as well. So it was just pressed up in Canada. I don't know why.
I'll have to get a version of that because as a matter of fact, I just yesterday in the mail received, because I want my daughters to each have a vinyl set of what I did with Prince and Duran Duran. The Duran Duran 8 CD one that I did with them is super hard to find. I only have one copy of that Simon Le Bon gave me. But it's even hard to find the One Night Alone live on vinyl and the after shows on vinyl. So I ordered them when they were available and came out. And just last week I ordered, and the after show came yesterday, and the One Night Alone live vinyl will come in about another week. So at least I can give one to each.
And then somebody pressed up a C. I think a pirate company pressed up the C Note one, and I think if you're looking for everything that's yours that's on vinyl out there, there's also a Club Vega one that was unofficial that was pressed up in Copenhagen.
Oh yeah. Oh
yeah.
So
this is one of those things that were like, being a sound guy for someone who does after shows like Prince, like, I mean, how much panic goes into checking for like the club having like secret feeds of their PA, like so they don't get recordings of the show?
That's a super good question. That's a really good question. The only time I ever caught someone red-handed was actually a monitor engineer who had worked with Prince. And he actually lasted a fairly long time. Then he went on to work at another club, or at a club in a different city. So when we came to work there, and I was like, hey, and I said, you going to go up and say hi to Prince? He's like, no, I don't think so, because he got fired. And he said, no, I don't think so. And he was like, no, I'm with you out front tonight. I was like, okay, cool. So what do you got? And he said, well, it's just easy. I'll just take a left, right sub fill if that's cool. I was like, sure. And we were talking. I was like, hey, it's good to see you, blah, 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 blah. We were in the middle of sound check. And I was looking at Prince's camera that I set up and was going to record. And I was looking at the outputs. And I only had I only had the left side. So I went around to the back of the console to open the doghouse, which is what we call the top of that. And I opened it up to kind of check the connect. But there was an input into the right side. It just wasn't working. So I went back to check the connection. And when I opened it, there was a mini disc recorder recording. And I went, and as I opened the doghouse and looked down and saw it, this guy came, that former monitor engineer came bolting across the room and came up, and Prince is on stage playing, and he looked, and I went, I look like that. And I looked up at him and he goes, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I don't know why I did that. And he's like yelling it over them jamming. He yells it into my ear. I'm sorry. I just wanted some sort of record of where I've worked and and I was like, oh my God, I'm so disappointed. And I ejected the disc and snapped it in two, and right in front of him, snapped it in two, and then put all the crushed stuff into my pocket, and just went, oh my God. And I said his name to him, and I went, I'm so disappointed in you, man. Like, this puts me in a really bad position.
Yeah.
You could have cost me my job. I said, I don't want to see you the rest of the day. I'm cool out here. I don't want to see you. And he just disappeared. And I'd never seen him since. And when I came back to mix a different band, I knew he was the house guy in the same city, but at a different place, theater. And I was like, oh, I know. I saw his name on the paperwork, so I know I was going to see him again. I said, hey, where's this guy? Like, is he working? Like, no, he's not. He's off today. I'm out here today with you. And I was like, oh, right. He took today off, and I went, oh, so I think he was either embarrassed or just, whatever. But no, that could have put me in a really bad position, because Prince did accuse me one time. No, 2 times, actually. Once we were in San Francisco, we were on stage. He was jamming. I went up to him and I wanted to ask him something. And I waited for him. He was just playing guitar, noodling guitar by himself. And he was like, he stopped and he turned, he goes, what, Scottie? You're standing awfully close to me. Are you recording me? And I went, oh man. I said, you know what, man? And immediately I said, if I had more self-respect, I would take offense to that. I said, I have to look out for you. And that doesn't feel good to be accused of that when I have to be there for you. I'm looking out for your best interest. And he goes, yeah, that's what all live engineers say. I was like, ugh, which was gross. Right. So, and then another time where there were 3 times, if you don't mind me indulging. The second time was when we did an after show in New York City that ended up being on the box set. It was some WWE wrestler, wrestling club. It was
the Globe.
The club always changed. It's a different club now. The Globe, something like that. Or no, it was some sort of whatever it was New York City. It's on the box set. I remember Chris Rock was there, and all these people were out at front of house when the show was going on. And after that show, I raced with the DAT out to get him in his limo. His limo had taken off. I was like, holy crap. His bus with the band members, they took off already. So I was there alone. I had to make my own way to the hotel. They took off already. I was like, holy crap, I've got this DAT now. So I had the DAT in my pocket. The bus comes to get me. I jump on the bus and with the other crew members that did the show. The next day, Prince comes up to me and he goes, where's that DAT? And I said, it's right here. It's been warm the whole time.
Yeah.
Meaning it's been on me in my, and he goes, right. How many copies did you make? And I was like, oh, God. So he goes to sit down and do sound check. And I grabbed a yellow my pad of paper that I always have next to me. And I wrote, at that point, I was Scottie P of sound, mind, and body do solemnly swear. I wrote a Boy Scout that this DAT tape has been in my possession the whole time. Da 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 da. If you ever hear a through the board recording, I will leave the show. I will leave the gig. Signed this date, whatever. Da da da. In 2000, and walked up to him and handed it to him as he was sat in the seats. And just sort of didn't shove it at him, but I just handed it to him. He took it and I walked away, and he crumpled it up and threw it. And so it was my way of saying, hey, thanks a lot for having no faith again. So then we cut to the last time. The last time was I was at Paisley Park. Prince, Zachary, who always came and got me, he comes and gets me and says he wants to see you in the studio. I walked in the studio and he goes, can you explain this? You wrote me a note that if I ever found a through the board tape. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, listen to this. And he hits play and it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
It sounded fat and EQ'd and the kick was punchy and the vocal, it was super clear, but I could tell it was live. I mean, it was clearly a microphone in a room. It wasn't through the board, but it sounded really tight. And then he plays it for like 30 seconds. He hits stop. He goes, explain this. And I go, no. Let it play between songs. And he hits play again and the song ended, or Kiss or whatever it was, it ended. And then you could hear right next to the microphone, yeah, all right, Prince. Clearly it was not through the board. I said, listen, there are people cheering. It's a microphone. It's not through the board. And he ejects the DAT and DATs are hard to get open. They're not like VHS tapes. Like you have to, and he dug it and snapped that DAT apart and pulled the tape out and was spooling it out. And he said, okay, you win this time. And he spooling the DAT tape out because he realized I was right. It was a microphone. So I'm proud that I always stuck up for myself, but he always thought engineers were, up to no good or being nefarious and doing things behind his back. And I'm not going to say that I don't think that engineers, when he was out of town or in Europe, didn't go down to the vault and spool stuff up and make copies of stuff. That's stupid to think that they didn't, because there's too much stuff got out there. Some of it I think was Prince himself releasing stuff because he was sort of restricted. Right? He was restricted by record companies. So some things I think he just let get out and other things I think were taken out. I'm almost sure, I'm not positive of it, but I would imagine if Prince is in Copenhagen and you're just sitting there on staff, you're not going to light a few candles in Studio A and spool some stuff up and see how he recorded that stuff, or just go, hey, I'm just going to quick make of course that happened. It happens all the time, as evidenced by all these things coming out now. You can find multi-tracks of all these artists from Beat It to, all these, the Beatles, how did they get these? All right. They just get them because engineers spool them up and make copies. So I'm proud to say that you can't find bootlegs through the console during my tenure. I'm very proud of that.
Did you ever get any, in later years, an engagement with him? Did you ever get any indication that he thought twice about it and thought, oh, well, okay, perhaps I was a bit harsh. I never really thought you did anything like that. Or did it ever resolve, or it was just left hanging?
No, he never lost that. He was always, I think, suspicious. And I don't blame him for that because he looked at his music as his children, as I talked about, and that's like absconding with, that's like taking somebody's offspring. That's a crime. That's kidnapping. And he would call it, I'm sure he would call it kidnapping. If I put my Prince hat on, he would say that was kidnapping. And as he said to It's a good story, so it's worth repeating. When we had just lost a very good monitor engineer named Gordon Mack on the musicology tour, and we had one after the other monitor engineers. Just every day we had a different one. They were all terrible, and they were all good, but they were not good enough to be with him. Okay.
Was it because of the? I mean, was it because of the in the round of the stage that presented the channel? Okay, no. It was them.
Out of the 33 monitor engineers that were there as I was running front of house, half were probably, or a little less than half were probably during musicology, and the rest were, there were probably 20 of them that were during regular shows. There was one that we got rid of right before the Hall of Fame gig. I ended up having to do monitors for the Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing, and then run up and then have someone babysit monitors while I ran up and did the house mix. So for that, so I was all over the place at that point. But as he got rid of one monitor engineer, he just said, "Scottie, come up here." And I came up on stage, and when I learned that Gordon was gone, and I just stood there with my arms folded, and he goes, he said, "Why can't you get me somebody that's musical and like does reverb, ballad reverb for reverb, is not afraid to mix me? They're all afraid." And I said, "Well, you've had a lot of engineers like that, but you fired them all." And he said, "I've never fired anyone in my career. They've all fired themselves." And I went, "Okay." So then we get some guy that didn't work out, and he made the guy, he's like, "Sing through this mic." And the guy's like, "Well, I'm not really a singer." And he goes, "You're not a singer. You're a monitor engineer and you're not a singer. Did you hear Scottie singing through the PA earlier?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Yeah." So he was singing. He was testing a PA by singing. And he said, "You have to," he said, "Well, let's get on this." Prince at least tried. To his credit, he said, let's get somewhere where we can understand each other. Do you have children?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, I have kids." And he goes, "Well, so do I. I have hundreds of kids. And we're going to perform about 26 of my children tonight. So what gives you the right to be the daycare provider for my children?" And then that's a mic drop question. You can't, there's no right answer. So the guy was like, and he goes, "Yeah, thanks for coming." And then the guy left. So Prince just didn't trust people with his children. And that extended just because I was cool and gave him a box set, which he made, by the way, $5 million off that box set. They were $49.99 when they came out, and they pressed 100,000 copies, if I'm correct. So I more than paid for myself just with that alone. So it's really about looking out for someone and their art and protecting their art. Now the ubiquity of nobody even cares about through the board recordings anymore because everyone records on an iPhone, and it's just changed. It's changed over the years. And an artist like Gaga was smart enough to understand where that change took place. And I said, "Hey," after about 3 or 4 months with Gaga, I said, "Hey, do you want to ever hear the through the board mixes so that you can, let me know if you want me to change anything?" And she's like, "No, Scottie, I know it sounds amazing. I watched the YouTube videos." And I said, "Oh, you don't want a board tape?" And she said, "No, none of my fans have access to board tapes, but they all have access to YouTube. So that's where I'm making my new fans." And I was like, "Oh my God, she's 100% right." So who cares about a board tape anymore, right? It's all about how it sounds in the room.
And that's one of the things I was going to ask you about when I was looking at some of the people you previously worked for who weren't Prince and weren't Madonna, because we spoke to you about Madonna on the last show. And Lady Gaga stood out because it looked like it was around the time of the Monster album coming out. So I just wondered if what that was like as an experience and as an artist, because I guess you've already identified something that she was kind of in a place mentally that, say, Prince wasn't. But anything else you've got to say about her as an artist? Any interesting stories? Or
yeah, she wanted me because I worked with specifically Prince and Madonna. So she wanted somebody with that sort of sensibility and musicality. And the highest compliment I can pay her is that she always knew what she wanted. She was always like super focused on exactly what she wanted, because I asked her conceptually, "Do you, on like day 2, I said, the first show we did was an AOL, some sort of America Online show in LA. It was like whatever. And then when we started going to rehearsals, that's when I got time with her. And I said, "Do you want me to make it sound like this, or how are you feeling? And give me some examples and whatever." And she said, "I want you to make it sound like a lavender knife." do you know what that sounds like? And I was like, yes, I do. It's beautiful and well constructed and a pleasure to be involved with, but agitate and sort of aggressive and possibly dangerous. And she went, exactly. I want you to give me your mix, but I want you to be a little dangerous. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I was like, cool. And then a couple of days later, when I had tracked a few things on multi-track, I said, do you want to hear some of this? She said, yeah, how can you make me aggressive? And I said, well, and I've told the story before, but it's worth repeating for the fans because this gives you an idea of the artistic conceptualization. I said, on Poker Face, you're singing on one note through the whole verse. And I'm going to add distortion vocal. How about this? And I showed her. Actually, I think I had the mic out there and I actually let her sing it too with the distortion on it. And then I said, but when you get to the chorus, I take it off and then you fly through the chorus really clean. But when you come back to the pa, 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 polka, that's when we distort you again. Make it just like a Trent Reznor, make it sort of like, make it aggressive. And she loved that. She grabbed me and shook me and said, yes, this is what I'm talking about. You're a producer. And I went, right. We're trying to do something different. If an artist wants everything to sound just like it does on the record, that's fine. But Prince never gave me direction as to making the generalization of the concert sound different. He did it through arrangement. So One Night Alone Live was very different. It was jazzy. They had lots of runs and lots of long-term things and no click. And right, it was a free form thing. I got what he was going for right away. So I made it more jazzy sounding. I left the toms open a bit. I let things ring. I encouraged the drum tech to leave the toms open, kind of do and just make it. And I opened everything up a little bit and gave it the jazzy sound because he wanted it to sonically be different, have a different signature than the normal thing. And I studied the Rainbow Children album really hard to make sure I got that sound. And so he never had to give me a concept. Gaga, Madonna, The Fray, even Tegan and Sarah had a great take on it. Tegan and Sarah had a meeting with me. They called the meeting with me. I didn't have to call it with them. And they're like, Scottie, we want you to, we want to sound, and I said, well, I can make every song sound how it does on its record. And they had a lot of records out, and do you want that disaffected shoegazer youth thing? Like, do you want that vibe or do you want it to be big and lush or do you want it to be, and they said, we want every song to sound exactly like it does on its record. I was like, thank you. Because that means every song sounded very different. And it was a cool concert to go to because it didn't have a sound to it. I really got to program things into the console digitally that made it sound just like their releases. So it was really fun to do that. And some artists have concept. Some artists do it through, like Prince did it through arrangement. Some leave it up to me. When I like it least is when they say, I don't know, man, you're Scottie Baldwin. Just do your thing, man. And I go, okay, that's cool. But I like I like people to say like, and I want it to be like this, or can you make me sound like rounder? I'm working with JJ Lin right now in Asia. Well, actually I'm going to Australia tomorrow and for shows in Sydney and Melbourne. And JJ's manager, Yvonne, is so good at coming up. I said, Yvonne, never feel that you can't come up to me and tell me what you're feeling. Like, I want you to be able to do that. We are a team. And she'll come up. She came up at the last show and she said, it sounds great, Scottie. Can you just make the band sound rounder? And I said, yeah, I know what you mean. And without having to make wholesale changes on everything, I said, stay here, watch this. And I first thing I did was push up the subs a little bit just to make it. And she said, right there, that's what I mean. And then she went, great, and ran off. And she just wanted the band to sound rounder. She wanted more subs, but she didn't know how exactly to say it. So part of my job is to be a translator. I had where we were used to doing it, but she wanted it to sound rounder. I said, sure, I can do that. I can do anything you want.
In like big echoey rooms, when you're dealing with really big rooms, how do you get those subs to still stay clear without them kind of like just thundering through? Because like I've been to some gigs where the subs, like they sound they've got that real kick and the great punch, the cleanness, and then somewhere it's just like kind of disappears. The reverb just kind of makes it what's the best way of describing it? Sometimes like it brings out a harmonic that's slightly out of tune with what the sub actually is. I'm like, I mean, that's a question that I've always wondered.
Well, as I've said before in more technical interviews, I've said there are no secrets. Any engineer that tells you, well, I have my tricks and my secrets, that's not true. And I think that's not treating your audience fairly. If especially if young engineers come to me and they want to know how I do things, I tell them, here's how I've done it in the past. Here's how I've achieved this. And one of the things that I do in a room that's got a lot of that runs around on you, right? It's like kids that have no fences and you're running a daycare and you got 30 kids and they're running. You have to have fences, right? So I just turn the subs down. One of the first things I do is turn the ground subs down. And I try and do as much as I can from the air so that you don't have subs. Can you imagine being the first person, being in the first row at a show? You go to this show and you're sitting in the first row and you've got 4 double 18 subs in front of you. And then this tiny, small little infill speaker that's supposed to balance that. It's so unfair. So I try and do as little sub as I need to bring into the gig. And there's a lot I could do in talking about subs. The reason I'm known for sort of a really tight drum and bass sound is because I kind of cut the bottom off of that stuff and only use as much of it as I need to. Prince, you have to know what the hierarchical structure of the mix is. Now that I mix a lot of Chinese pop, it's all about the vocal. It's about making sure that vocal is heard first and foremost, even more so than in Western music. It's a 20% to 33% change above how we mix in the West. That lead vocal, that superstar, needs to be heard loud and clear. And I've made that adjustment in my head. So now I hear it. When I hear mixes in the West, I go, vocal's not loud enough, right? And then the first thing that would run over that are subs and low end. Because they, as Prince said, you can't have the subs robbing the room of all the low end on the 1 and the 3. Right? It's just a problem. And engineers don't know how to get that do. And as I said in some other interview, and it's again worth mentioning here, Prince said, Scottie, how do you get the subs tight? And I was like, I just turn them down and I carve them up so that they're not too boomy. And he goes, right, it's supposed to sound like a Cadillac door shutting. And that's a perfect way to describe it. Right. And then, of course, I picture some big old Cadillac and just going, thup. It should just go thup. It should go boop. And it shouldn't go boom and make things move. Like, that's not pleasurable. And that's when you leave a venue and you're like, oh, my ears hurt. It's typically not from the high end. It's going to be from the low end that just runs through you and just eats your.
And also, like,
if
you've got like a sub that kind of just rings on, like, because I've always admired like old like desk recordings of, like, say the 94, 95, like Michael Bland's kick. He's so punchy, so deep, but it doesn't ring enough to kind of rob the funk, because if all the bass is just like boo, 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 like, there's no syncopation, there's no space on the 2, 3, on the 2, 3, and 4 for all of the other kind of runs.
Right.
If Let's Work was just all like the first note, boom, and you would be robbed of all of the movement. Yeah. So I've always loved I've always loved Michael Bland's foot on that one. He's always had this really heavy.
It really has to do with a multitude of things. It's how Michael struck the drum. He was so authoritative and had such a big, 15 triple E, right? So he would just go, and it sort of killed the sound. It sort of was so big that it canceled itself out after the kick. I mean, and I was his drum tech for 6-7 years. So I can tell you, I know that intimately, that sound. And Michael just is very authoritative and sharp on his kick. And it also has to do with, back then he had an engineer named Dave Natal who mixed Tina Turner and the Rolling Stones forever, and like a super solid engineer. So he was very good at making things tight, sound really tight. And when you get engineers that know what they're doing and musicians that know what they're doing and a room that's ready to capitulate and sort of give in, some rooms I have to be extra careful and I have to take the time to really come into a room and say, hey, we're working together today. Prince was just smart enough to understand that a room is a band member as well. Yeah. And you have to treat that band member with respect and sort of play into the room. You can't kind of run over it. I just played with JJ Lin. And for those who are wondering, it's JJ and then the last name is Lin. JJ's a huge star in China. And he's big enough where we're doing arenas around in the US, and we just did a US run and UK, and now we're heading to Australia and back to Asia. And JJ, we just played Singapore National Stadium, and that's 85,000 people, 90,000. It's an enormous place. We played it sideways, so it was that many people. I mean, it's a whole different thing to see, and it's indoor, so you have this stadium. It's called Singapore National, I think it's stadium, or maybe it's arena, but it's that many people and it's got a roof. There's only one area that's open to the outside. And that had a full 6-7 second reverb where I could go, hey, through the PA, and it would go, hey, just forever. And I went, oh, this will be fun. And Ed Sheeran's played there, and people have played there, and they all have their thing. But I had no trouble with it. And as a matter of fact, all the reports, everyone was so worried. I was like, we'll be fine, guys. We'll be fine. And it was fine because you just have to know how to massage the room and really make sure that the room wants to have its stamp on things. And if you go on YouTube and look up JJ Lin Singapore Stadium or whatever from this year, you can hear when he says something and when he's just speaking, and you can hear that, how deep that reverb is on there. And that's not me doing that. That's the room. You just have to play nice. You just play nice and be a good playmate with the room, and the room usually responds.
So it's work with the room rather than try and get the room to do what it's naturally trying to do. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
So I think, because the last time we spoke to you was like September 2022. And I think it was Jolin Tsai, if I'm saying that right.
Yeah, Jolin.
Yeah. Who I think you did like 3 years worth of work with, 22, 23, 24. I haven't looked at your page. So
yeah, that's right.
The stuff, I'm just curious. You've said something really interesting about sort of the listener consciousness being slightly different. So consequently, you would concentrate on that vocal area in a different way and how everything would be set up. Is there anything that you'd come across whilst working within that environment and engaging with those musicians and other creatives that retrospectively you would have ever found useful in the Prince days?
Oh, for sure. That's a super good question too. Yeah, as we get older and more experienced, we always learn things that we would go back and we would change how we did certain things. One of the things that I like, a very specific example of it is, and Kirk Johnson and I laugh about this till this day. The drum tech on Musicology, I won't say his name, but the drum tech didn't know necessarily how to run the John Blackwell's pad very well. And what I'm looking for, his drum pad. So when John played, remember, he played everything analog. Like he would start loops and he would do the claps and he would do all these things when DMSR, he was doing the shaker by hand. I mean, it was all by hand. John was extraordinary. But this drum tech and John only had one clap sound. It was just one tuning, like right in the middle. And I tried to tell this drum tech and John, I was like, guys, Pop Life has a super low clap, the lowest clap in his arsenal, right, of all his songs. Then there's the clap from Lady Cab Driver, which is super high. Like you have these different clap sounds and you have to match the tuning. We're talking about like an octave difference in Prince's career. And I always wanted so I would, when I did them for Bobby Z, when the Revolution remounted, I took the time to tune every clap to the right, so Bobby had access to every clap. Nice. So the Pop Life clap went like that. And the Lady Cab Driver was like, right. So you had to sort of know where they landed. And I would spend hours just like arduously going through all the samples, like, that's it right there. That's it. And then taking that and putting the right echo on it and putting the right, verb on it and stuff. Yeah. And I look back at it's specifically, it's not even One Night Alone, or it's the Live from Vegas DVD, because that was live to 2-track. And that clap I had, for some reason, I had a little bit louder than I probably should have, or I didn't have enough. I don't like to compress things very much. And certainly on that show, I probably should add more compression on the clap. They could have done it in post-production and just found where that clap exactly was and compressed just those frequencies a little bit more. And they didn't. I could probably go make my own version of it, but I don't have the time or inclination to do that. But that clap, Kirk goes, oh, every time I think of that Live from Vegas DVD, I go, oh, God, that clap. Because it's just the same sound in every song and the same volume. And it just drives me bananas. But it's really being more... as far as other artists, it's really remaining true to what they had on the record, owing only in difference to their conceptualization for the live show. So it's trying to get to what the record sounds like first, and then moving off of that. That's what I'm good at now, and that's what I do most. It's the quickest path to a good live mix, is saying, let's start with the record. Like, do we want it to sound like the record? Yeah. Okay. Any deviation, let me know. And then we can move off of that. But that's really the only thing that I bring to other artists and do with other artists now that I should have done with Prince is, but again, I was so busy and so tired for so many years in a row. It was just never ending. It was like being a firefighter, but you never had time off. Think of it that way.
I mean, because I think about the amount of last minute parties, last minute gigs, and that even between, say, 2000, 2001, those hit and run shows, and then, 2002 comes One Night Alone, you've got a load of like Paisley Park parties and one off gigs here, there, and never. I mean, that firefighting thing you say, when does like just kind of doing random gigs and rehearsing for random gigs become a whole tour concept? Because like One Night Alone has a much more defined tour concept, than some. I mean, the hit and run shows, they had their set list and they had a structure, but like, is it just like a fluid thing that one just flows into the other, or was there a day when you're coming in, it's like, that's it, the hit and run shows are gone and we're doing this whole new album live?
Yes, Prince very much always had the concept already done. I would have to think hard for any time I actually made. He asked me for suggestions of songs during musicology that I wanted to hear, because he said the fans are all asking for different songs, and who would you want? Or is there a song that I'm missing? Is like, I really want to hear I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man. I love when we do that one. And I don't remember him doing that in 2004. I don't think he did it, but then he did ask me for opening acts. He said, do you have any opening acts you'd like to see that would open up for us? Oh, he said us, not me. This was really kind of him. He said, do you have anybody you like that you want to open up for us? And I was like, oh, well, let me think about it. And now I could name like 20 bands, and that would love the chance to, that are up and coming. And you really, that's the thing about Prince, is that it looked like he was kind of controlling all these people that he had go on before him, whether it be The Time or Sheila or things like that. But I like to think of it differently. I like to think of it as he gave people a chance that probably otherwise wouldn't have. I mean, what's the bass player who was so talented that my brother-in-law was her bass teacher. She had a solo career.
Oh, I know who you mean. Esperanza Spalding? Or
Esperanza Spalding. She actually, my brother-in-law taught her bass. She thanks him multiple times on her records.
Wow.
Back in Portland.
She's a stunning bass player,
and she's amazing. And like he gave people chances that that otherwise probably wouldn't have had chances too. And I like that.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean he went and found a local band in every city, which would have been super cool? Like, who's a hot local band that we have coming up in Abilene? Like, I don't know. There are these kids out of, there's this band called $50 Dynasty. Let's have them open up for us. He wasn't like that, but he did have people play that wouldn't have garnered that much attention. So I always appreciated that about him. He was open to that kind of thing. But he, because now it's so, that's one thing I don't have to deal with over in China and in Asia, are opening acts. They just don't do them over there. It's just, you come for the artist. And that's really a benefit to me, because then people have fresh ears. They haven't been beat up already for 45 minutes or an hour and a half. And their ears are already just, trashed by the time I get to them. But Prince was very kind in giving people a lot of, I even say that Third Eye Girl, when I had coffee with them, Prince sent me out to have coffee with them and just said, hey, listen, look at this opportunity you have. He put this band together. It's just you three, and you're going to do all these great things. And they flew on private jets, and he would ask them, like, where do you want to play tomorrow night? I'm like, let's go play in Paris. Like, okay, we're going to Paris. Tell the pilot we're going to Paris. And they would just book a show in Paris and just like fly around and do shows. Amsterdam. Okay, let's play that church place in Amsterdam. Okay. And they would just kind of just fly around and do things. And that's so cool. And we just don't have artists like that anymore, unless it's already planned out to come off as that, right? That's the big difference.
Yeah, whether there's like a kind of a social media aspect of where next type thing.
Right.
So did you like do sound for the Third Eye Girl, some of the Third Eye Girl rehearsals and shows? Or?
No, I did. I set up for rehearsals when they first we're putting the band together, when Prince put the band together. I set up rehearsals, set up the board, turned it so that he could use it. then I just didn't show up for rehearsals, and he didn't want me there anyway. He wanted to knock the rust up, kind of figure them out for himself. So, and then I didn't end up doing shows. The only thing I did that had Ida was involved, I think, was that I mixed was the last show, the St. Bart's last
Yeah.
NPG show. But that was Kirk drumming and Ida playing. There were all sorts of different players there. It was sort of a conglomeration of different artists that came in for that show. Patchwork, band.
I think if you did their first rehearsal, I think that he ended up putting those videos out of I think it was Donna's first rehearsal. So if you were doing that rehearsal,
might have been, it could have been. I was there when they cut Screwdriver and those kind of things. So, and that was up.
Yeah.
That was up on the big stage. But the rehearsal that I set up, that Prince ran, that I had him running sound for, because I didn't want to sit all day long, and I think I was actually on something else, so I set up the desk so he could run it. Was in Studio C with the mirrors. So
right.
unless the video was from there, there was stuff that Jason, my friend Jason Franzen, came up in 2012 and was part of shooting some stuff for Prince of Third Eye Girl. So they were already underway around that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just like that he mentored young players and wanted different people around. And a lot of people say, well, you have Michael Bland as a drummer. Why would you ever have anyone else? But he wanted a different flavor. He wanted a different thing, and he quite often did whatever he wanted to do to get the right flavor of band that he wanted.
Yeah, because towards the end, you even have like people like Mono Neon as well, like in and these. We're always forever hearing of like, just from a fan point of view, because we're not there, like we weren't there day to day knowing what's going on. We just kind of hear what gets released. It's like there's so many stories of like, yeah, I went into Paisley Park, did 2 sessions, did 3 sessions, and recorded, and it seems like it was just the thing he did. He had his band, but he had people coming in and out just to spur ideas.
I think so, and that's my chess theory. In the old days, that kings would play chess. They'd have a visiting king. If someone visit their kingdom, they'd play chess with real people on a real chessboard on the lawn. And the knights were people on horses. Like, that's just crazy. We think of that as like, oh my God, we've got these however many chess pieces there are. These people just sitting out in a hot field, playing chess. But that's it, the level of chess was different. So Prince, instead of, when he knew he could do it all himself in the studio, for sure. He'd done it time and time again. What he did when he used people was that's where he would get the different inspiration. I know Mono Neon inspired him a lot. So he even though Mono Neon came on the trip, he came on the trip to St. Bart's, and I had an input for him, and he sound checked his bass. And then Prince got there and got to the venue, and then we were going to just play. And Prince goes, "What's he doing here?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I thought he was no, Ida's playing." And so Mono Neon just sat on the stairway by Paul McCartney and just watched the whole gig. And then I forgot who was playing sax on that gig, but he just, like, there was no mic. He was like, "Oh, he came along and I had a mic," but he's like, "No, just have him play through my vocal mic." And I went, "Oh my God. Okay." So when he came up and did a solo, I had to like turn it way down because it was, 20 dB hotter. And so it was just, he just liked to play, and he used different people in his career for different sorts of inspirations.
One of the things it's made me think of is, because you're going through like the firefighting thing has sparked off so many questions for me. One of them is like, so One Night Alone is a very structured show, or at least in America it was. It became less so when it came to like Europe and Japan. But there's been a couple of shows, like one when I think it was Louisville, where the horn section didn't turn up, and then it becomes like, it opens with a piano gig. When something like that happens, does he come to you beforehand and go, "We've got a problem"?
No, I didn't even know that.
Show like this now.
We played Louisville, and there was no horn section for the whole show.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
So the start of it was just the piano, like the piano ballad section. Yeah. He opens the show with that.
I love that. No, if he did come to me, or someone did tell me, "Hey, we have no horns tonight," I probably just, back then, I'm not sure if I was on a digital desk at that point. I think I was still on the analog console, the one that recorded the the box set, but I probably just turned down their inputs or just pulled their faders down and we did a show like that. But that doesn't surprise me. And if anyone can come up with a way to arrange around not having your horn section, it would be him. Nowadays, I would take a multi-track of the horn section and we would just fly it into the programmer in the playback and the horn section. Or if guitar player number 1 gets sick, I take the recording from last week, send the whole recording from last week and the click track to the playback programmer, and they would line up the clicks and then erase the clicks and then just have the guitar player come through playback. That's how it's done nowadays. But Prince was smart enough and able enough to arrange around people missing and things like that, which is brilliant.
I love that you're so busy. It's like, don't even remember a gig with a horn set.
I don't remember that, but I would like to hear that gig. I've been a little more, I'll have to say I think we're at, is this 9 years? I forget. I keep forgetting.
Oh yeah, it's 2016. So you're around 9 years.
So we're coming up on 9 years, right? You get to 1 year, and then 2, 3, and 4 aren't really special. Then you go, 5, it's been 5 years, right? And then maybe you'd say 7 because Prince had a thing about the number 7, okay? So then 8, 9 are nothing. They're not really thought about. And maybe 7 was just in my head. But then we get to 10. So in a year and change, we're going to be at 10 years. Nothing's being done. Nothing's being harvested. Nothing's being sort of, and my question for you guys is, how do you continue to, as people like me start forgetting the stories about missing horn section in Louisville and things like that, how do you keep things alive? That's actually a question for the estate and for you. Given the current state of how things are, what would you two do? What's a logical path that would keep Prince in because honestly, it hurt my heart when I went over and I was playing somewhere, or maybe it was the Fray. We were overseas, and the front of house system engineer for the day with that club said, "Hey, I know you. Like, are you Scottie Baldwin? Did you mix Prince?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm Scottie Baldwin." He's like, "Oh man, it's great. I read this art, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Oh, great to work with you. We're going to have fun today, blah, blah, blah." And then the monitor system engineer walked up and the guy said, "Do you know who this is?" He turned to his colleague and he said, "This guy worked with Prince." And the monitor assistant said, "Which one, William or Harry?" And I went, "Oh." And I remember that sort of feeling. I went, "Oh man." And this guy clearly should have known who, he was old enough to know, but I went, "Oh, here we go. Like, here's how it starts." And so what do you do with people who don't, because they don't know who he is in China and in Asia pretty much anymore. Almost none. The musicians, the really, really good musicians, no. There's a friend of mine, Peter, who played in Joe Lin's band, who's based out of Taipei. And most of the Taipei artists know who Prince is because they had access to Prince's stuff. But some of the Chinese musicians and some of the people who or if they're either young or from an area that the ubiquity wasn't there for Prince. So they just go, "We don't know who that is." And I go, "Really? Like this?" Or they go, "No, I don't know who that is." And the ones who know and love him, and the ones who don't, but the ones who know is getting smaller and smaller.
I think in answer to your question, because I have like a theory about music. You know the thing where you think, as you get older, I guess you concentrate on the music that you grew up on, right, and the music that was in your main years when you were out and about before you became a family person and all these kind of things. And then obviously there is always music around. But I mean, I have an 18-year-old daughter and she listens to Prince. Now, obviously she's heard Prince around me, but I've never pushed Prince on her. Not in a, you must listen, let me do you a playlist, mm-hmm, etc. She had a period of listening to quite a lot of K-pop and she enjoyed that. But in the last couple of years, genuinely, with things, I guess, like Spotify, she listens to Prince, she listens to The Cure, she listens to a lot of sort of random 80s pop. And I just think that there is a sustainability because of the way that the music industry is, and because I don't think live you can hear quite as many things around the world live as you could in like the 90s and the early 90s. I guess I'm saying this from a Western perspective, Scotty, so you can correct me, obviously. But I think that sort of, if you think of of Prince, I don't know how many acts are out there who aren't also sort of like Shaka Khan with her band or Stevie Wonder, where you have a big ensemble band playing, and particularly in Prince's case, playing lots of eclectic different types of music. So consequently, then that generates in the live environment, the tribute environment, which thrives, I think, because the young artists who may have developed into the bands who would have been doing those gigs playing that kind of music don't have the roots through the music industry. There aren't as many live venues. Again, I'm looking at this from a UK perspective a little bit. So basically, what I'm getting at is there is a type of music, and in many ways, a type of new music that you don't hear live as much anymore. And it's impressive because it's lots of musicians. It's not people who've recorded stuff on computers at home, which I have absolutely no issue with. There's some amazing music of that ilk. But in answer to your question, how do you keep artists like Prince alive? I think a little bit it sort of it's happening organically because the next version of Prince isn't coming through. The next version of Bowie isn't coming through. The next Queen isn't coming through because I don't think that there's an infrastructure to allow that to happen in a way, because I think artists to some degree are more controlled, packaged. So it's sort of an answer in terms of how do you keep Prince alive. I think as time goes on, as long as people can get to his music, he stands out as being something completely different, of which there are not many versions of anymore, if any.
I mean, I agree on. I think you're going to need along with that organic thing that's happening underneath, which I really do see that kind of thing of a lot of young people that because I work with people in their 20s and at my station, and they're kind of like, well, my generation's music is terrible, and I keep on trying to tell them, no, there's good stuff always being made. There was terrible stuff in the 80s and 90s. It's just that it didn't last. You don't kind of get reminded of it. It just falls by the wayside. Go and look back at a chart show from the 80s and 90s. You'll see a lot of great stuff, but you'll see a lot of terrible stuff too. But it's going to need to be I guess, first off, this is why we do this, is to stop those stories being lost. This is why we do. I mean, there's a curiosity from ourselves that we kind of feed into that. There's also, the books that are being written. There's also there was a social aspect to being a Prince fan. We waited in queues and formed kind of like small families. So we still have later this year we're going to run. There's going to be a Prince party on a boat going up and down the Thames, just playing Prince songs. So there's social stuff, and a lot of those people do bring their kids who are like fans. So there's going to be that kind of route, and I think that's how Elvis's legacy survived. A lot of it was like obsessed parents passing on their kids and creating an emotional attachment to it that isn't about. Our attachment to Prince is he was the cool thing. He was the voice of our rebellion. He's going to have to become something else. He's going to have to be the voice of a connection to the parents or what have you in that way. And they're going to have to find the emotional aspects of Prince. Now, Prince is also a difficult one because some people you just need to give them the hits and it's fine. Prince is someone you need to curate. And this is what I don't know the particular business dealings that have happened over this Netflix documentary, but I do understand that the contracts that have been laid out have stopped some of the releases. Now, I don't know if that means that we're going to get a flood ton of stuff in the next year or the next 2 years. I mean, I know that Paisley Park are now screening a 4K of a 2011 Welcome to America show that isn't the one that's on the Welcome to America box set. So there is kind of stuff around, but it might, and this is the thing that a lot of Prince fans might have struggled with. We might have to do something that he didn't like, i.e., we might have to concede a thing like ABBA Voyage, where we have a that live experience. See, I can see Paddy wincing, Paddy, because of what he specifically said. But we might have to have a thing like, and maybe not like that, but the live band playing to his voice, even if it's not a computer generated one, say there was enough multi-tracked concerts from his entire history that we could have a band playing, and they've done this at various celebrations, a band playing while he plays on the other screen. So I know that some people don't feel comfortable with that, but I think if we're talking about the longer legacy, and I mean, we know that there's enough stuff in that vault for 100 years, but you have to sometimes, 100 years from that artist is going to be a very different cultural landscape. So you're going to have to, what that artist means and does has to change. So I mean, it's a complicated one, but I think sometimes on some level you have to respect and his legacy and what he was about. But maybe someday, just for the sake of keeping Paisley Park's roof from rusting and leaking through, you might have to do
The
something
sad part
he doesn't
about
like
this
as well.
is that because someday somebody's going to listen to this podcast that we're doing right now, and the documentary will have been released because there's just too much money on the table for them not to release it. They know it's going to win awards. They know it's going to be, and a more cynical side of me would say that this is all some ruse that's happening to create a buzz that's just doesn't really seem to be happening, because that was very Prince-like as well. It's the Black Album of documentaries. Is it released? Is it out? Is it not out? Do you have a copy? Is it legit? Yeah. So there could be that aspect of it, and the joke could be on us. But someday somebody will have. Everyone will have seen the documentary and then listen to this podcast and go, "Oh, those guys just didn't know back then." I knew. Like I think ahead like that. It's what's happening is the sad part about it being Prince, unlike Bowie, unlike Whitney Houston, unlike Elvis, unlike so many, Queen had a good run and with the movie and stuff, but Prince has so much music to be released. Unlike those artists, they just don't have the kind of volume, or Eddie Van Halen, right? They just don't have the volume. So you go, oh, you're just like, oh, it's there. It's right. It's so close. We can almost taste it. But here's the way I counter that is by saying, my own thought is by saying, if you did release it, you would just have more Prince music, but he's not here. And the special thing about Prince was knowing that he was in the world. That was a really big part of it. You don't need that with Whitney Houston. You don't. I'm sorry. You just don't. You kind of need it with Michael.
Yeah.
Right. But Michael had enough demons in his past that, there's not as many tears being shed for that. You don't need it with Elvis. He went away a long time ago now, and he's still being talked about, and you still hear his music. Prince, it's knowing what he would think about all these things that have gone on. And, part of the beauty of Prince is that he would write in sort of a mixed metaphor way about a subject. And he was either very direct about it, as in Baltimore, as in some of his responses to social things directly. And then other ways he would write about it in a very cloaked and cryptic form. But just knowing he's not here anymore is enough to make me go, oh man. So my initial thought was, when I was asked about it, not that I have any, matter of fact, I put myself behind Prince fans as in line as far as the importance of what I think. I think what Prince fans think and want is more important than what I just happen to work with the guy. We worked together for a long time and in different forms, but I would have released everything in one day. Every single thing in the vault, I would have given it away for free in one day, everything. And then just flood the market, flood it, and just say, here's a gift that no one is going to make money off of. No one is going to have, and no one is able to release all the live shows, release all the unreleased stuff. Just give it all away. And as a gift, give it all away. Yes. And people are, people who don't want that to happen are thinking about the business end of it. Well, we know how that's going. How's that going so far? You're going to not business him right into the ground. So if they want to release the thing, I guess if I were to put my finger on one thing that I think should be released, and it isn't, believe me, I've thought about this. It's not because I was involved with it as a very, very responsible part of it. But the autobiographical January 21st, 2016 show should be released. It ties up a lot of loose ends. It talks about his childhood and with his dad. It's somewhere out there, like somebody has it. Somebody has to have recorded it. It's not going to. I wonder how many mics were in the room that day besides my console and the like 6 or 8 audience mics I had. But somebody has the whole script online somewhere. You can find it. I'm sure it's easy to find. And he talks about growing up and his dad, and talks about Wendy and Lisa, and he thanks me, and he talks about David Bowie, and he's like, it's a big deal. Like that would be something that at the end wouldn't just be another Moonbeam Levels. This is a different whole thing that he was giving, and he was giving it. He gave less of it on the Australia tour.
Yeah.
And he was just messed up, and so he wasn't in a good mood, and Vanity had Denise had just passed. And so he was just not in a good mood. And I'd never know whether he's going to be happy or mean when he came in that day. So that's what led to me going, oh my God, I got to get out of here. This is untenable. It was not fun at all for even a minute. I'm about to go back to Australia again, as I did 2 years ago. And I'm able to sort of put to bed some of these. Every time I go back there, I'm like, oh yeah, this place is okay. I'm not going to flinch like I've got shell shock, because of it. And actually remember those things fondly. And we did have some good memories and very few on that tour. But one of them was when he was actually complaining at he did the first show at the first night at the Opera House. And in between shows, he's like, Scottie, it just doesn't feel like it's in my face. He wasn't really complaining, but he's like, I just want the piano to sound in my face. And I was like, well, I can move the monitors up close. Like I can crank it up or do. And he's like, no, it's like per song, it should sound like this. And we were in his dressing room and he had a Yamaha upright and he played the piano part from the Max really loud. He went, right. And I started grooving as he was playing it, because it was so cool to hear it like on an acoustic piano upright right in there. And I was like, yeah, like that. And he's like, wait, why are you grooving? I'm saying I want it to sound like this. I said, because I don't know, man, that sounds great. And he goes, right, you need it to sound like this out there. And I was like, oh God. So I was just enjoying the moment. I was trying to have give me my moment of enjoying that, because that was a blast from the past too, and he was, but what he wanted on that tour changed every single day, every single show. So it was like, he would walk by one show and squeeze my arm and say, thanks, sounds great, don't change anything. And then I wouldn't change anything. And he'd come back the next day, and during rehearsal, he'd go, what did you change? And I'd say, nothing. I'm not stupid, man. I didn't change a thing. It's actually been on all night like this. Like I didn't even turn the amps off. And he goes, you're a liar. Like it was just like, what? It was crazy. It was crazy. And that it all makes sense now. But at the time I was like, oh my God, he's just super jet lagged. Like he's just jet lagged. He's that messed up. So it's but what are you going to, how that all fits in with the what's going to happen in the future. And again, if the estate wants to release that show, it's multi-tracked. The estate has it. I guarantee it. I have the certified mail that I sent it by courier back to the estate. If they release that, they're going to have to call me, because I'm one of only 2 people that Kirk and I are the only 2 that can tell the story of that night. Yeah. And just how special that night was. Not every show he did was special. Not every concert he did was special. Absolutely. Not every song he did was special. We know that. But that particular night, that January 21st, 2016, is everyone would want to hear that, and it would put closure to a lot of people.
So Scottie, on behalf of Paddy, our listeners, and all the rest of the PPUK podcast, thank you for coming back again. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Thank you for being generous with the stories. It is appreciated, and it is part of keeping this thing alive, of not just that this guy was an amazing artist, that it was a unique creative environment that existed, and it's palpable from the way that people talk that were there. So thank you so much.
It's entirely my pleasure, and I like what you guys are doing, because you are I'm doing what I can to service him in death as I did in life. I think that's important, to try and be a good soldier for what we were trying to do in life. And that's why I could always get over when we had an argument or I walked out on something or he didn't ask me back is because there was a greater mission involved. And it was always about just those moments that happened that you and all the other PPUK fans went through when they were at shows. And so if this is the way that we have to continue on, if it's not through his new music, then it's through this way. And I promise you, I'll be the last one standing there, waiting to keep this thing going on.
And our ears will be listed.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey.
Good night.
Good night.